On November 30th, 1982, something appeared on record store shelves. Something so hypnotic, so enticing, so unstoppable. Nothing and no one could stand in its way. What came next would send shockwaves around the world and change the face of popular music forever. That something being the legend that would become Thriller.
Yes, Michael. I'm not like other guys.
Michael Jackson's single that is currently #1 on the Rhythm and Blues and Pop Single charts. Jackson is also the first singer ever to have an album and a single in first place on both charts.
Selling album in the country is Michael Jackson's Thriller.
Now, since Michael Jackson is a proud winner of 8 shiny new Grammys, you might expect the sales of his records to suddenly surge. Sorry, you see, sales have always been up.
Anything with Michael Jackson on it does continue to sell. I love you, Michael Jackson.
The album broke down every barrier imaginable, appealing to black and white, young and old, rich and poor, across the nation and beyond. Within 15 months, Thriller would become the best-selling album of all time and the nation's top-selling record for 2 years in a row, with eventual sales of an estimated 70 million copies worldwide. Despite critics characterizing Thriller as simply a collection of hits rather than a coherent body of work, Thriller's production quality, innovative music videos, and Michael Jackson's incredible instincts as a performer set new standards for creativity. Quote, "Sequencing an album," Quincy Jones explained, "is one of the joys in being a producer because it's like making a movie." Michael Jackson's passion for the art of filmmaking drove him to not only create a musical masterpiece, but a visual one as well. For the first time exploring visions much darker and more sinister, revealing his own internal angst. Life would ultimately imitate art, as themes outlined in Thriller predicted struggles Michael would endure in the years to come, as though he knew it to be his destiny. He sings about being afflicted by relentless speculation, paranoia, and press intrusion, as well as intense feelings of isolation and longing for meaningful human connections. The unavoidable mindless zombies out for his blood, whether corporate leeches, the tabloids, or a predatory medical system, resulting in his startling physical transformation that the public bared witness to. Thriller left an indelible mark on Michael Jackson, a pinnacle he long yearned for, but was ultimately haunted by. Every album, single, or career move since would undoubtedly be compared to the once-in-a-lifetime hysteria Thriller mania ignited. An experience so intoxicating, Jackson never stopped pushing harder and farther to strive beyond its confines. A time when he believed his talents were endless, his impact expansive, and his legacy so enduring it will last forever. This is Thriller Forever, a video series chronicling every detail in the construction, release, and lasting impact of Michael Jackson's musical juggernaut. From the good, the incredible, the bad, and the downright ugly. To understand the motivations behind Thriller, we must first get to grips with the context of its recording and Michael Jackson's career thus far. At 23 years old, he was already a veteran of showbiz, having been a star since the early 1970s. He, with his brothers, achieved an incredible run of crossover hits as the Jackson 5, which was followed by Michael's massive solo success with 1979's Off the Wall. The album, the first to be produced by Quincy Jones, achieved a music industry milestone with 4 top 10 hits, earning Jackson a Grammy for Best R&B Male Vocal Performance for its lead single, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. Having sold over 8 million copies by 1982, Off the Wall was the best-selling album by a black artist up until that point. Beyond his early Motown child stardom, Jackson had now proven himself as a vibrant solo artist with his disco-defying breakout. However, despite these achievements, Jackson was surprisingly disappointed by the record's outcome, both critically and commercially. After Off the Wall, Michael Jackson experienced a transitional period, a time of increased independence. Soon hiring John Branca, Michael told the entertainment lawyer that he needed to be the biggest and the wealthiest star in show business. He expressed how upset he was about his perceived underperformance of Off the Wall, feeling it deserved the Grammy Award for Record of the Year. From Michael's standpoint, he and Quincy Jones produced one hell of an album, and all he got in return was a token from the Grammy voters, who still saw him as that cute little kid with the great moves on The Ed Sullivan Show. Michael vowed it can never happen again. In general, he felt undervalued by the music industry, demonstrated in 1980 when Rolling Stone declined to run a cover story on him. Jackson responded, quote, "I've been told over and over that black people on the cover of magazines don't sell copies. Just wait. Someday those magazines are going to be begging me for an interview. Maybe I'll give them one, and maybe I won't." Therefore, Michael Jackson approached recording his next LP with this competitive determination, motivated by the bitter embarrassment he felt he suffered and his refusal to be overlooked. With laser focus, Michael was intent to study, practice, and create something so incredible it would be impossible for anyone to ignore it. In general, Michael Jackson was frustrated by albums that had one good song and the rest were like B-sides. The singer saying, quote, "Ever since I was a little boy, I would study composition, and it was Tchaikovsky that influenced me the most. If you take an album like the Nutcracker Suite, every song is a killer, every one. So I said to myself, why can't there be a pop album where every song is a killer?" With his next record, Jackson wanted to continue to push his creative capabilities. The United States was in the midst of a deep recession with unemployment reaching a 4-decade high. Record sales had been declining since the late 1970s. Disco had faded without anything really to replace it. New Wave and MTV were only in its infancy, and the top 40 radio had all but died, as stale classic rock dominated the airwaves. As the New York Times put it, quote, "There had never been a bleaker year for pop than 1982. The music industry needed a radical shakeup, and for it to have been delivered into record stores yesterday. Therefore, on the first day of recording, producer Quincy Jones walked into Westlake Studios in Los Angeles and said, quote, "Okay guys, we're here to save the recorded music industry." To accomplish this, one of their priorities was to balance the album's various genres and forms between R&B, pop, rock, disco, funk, and ballads, producing an album that wouldn't be restricted by racially drawn classification of genre or radio play. As in the early 1980s, radio was still largely segregated, adhering to narrow programming based on racialized genres. Jackson and Jones reviewed hundreds of song demos, listening to each one to see if it had the qualities they were looking for. Jones referred to this process as, quote, "Polaroids." Each potential song was held up to see how it fit in with their pre-existing material and if it met their exacting standards. Quote, "I called Michael Smelly because when he liked a piece of music or a certain beat, instead of calling it funky, he'd call it smelly jelly. When it was really good, he'd say, 'That's some smelly jelly.'" Songs written by Michael were dictated into an audio recorder, after which he'd sing them from memory. Bruce Swedien remembering, quote, "Michael was never late for a session. If anything, he would be early. Also, I never remember recording Michael with the lyrics in front of him. He would stay up all night memorizing the song or songs we were about to record. I don't think there are a lot of artists who do that." In addition to memorizing the lyrics, Michael also preferred to record vocals in the dark, so he could, without distraction, focus on his voice, the intentions of the words, and the emotions behind them. Swedien adding, quote, "The human being is primarily a visual animal. Hearing is our second sense. People can be distracted by too much light in the studio to the extent that it can take away from the music."
I adore Michael. He's the greatest. And Michael is very, very polite, and he's a wonderful guy to work with. And he would say, "Bruce, that's perfect, but let's try one more." And this is like mix 80. And so I say, "No problem." So we did it.
Of course, it wasn't all fun and games. According to Jackson, Quincy was a perfectionist. He always asked for another take. Quincy would often get frustrated with Jackson for spending so much time rehearsing his dance moves. Additionally, creative tensions started to reveal themselves between the two. Quote, "There was a point where we thought it was all over, that we were all finished," remembers keyboard player Greg Fillinganes. Quote, "There had been so much hard work and long hours, and Quincy's saying it's not there yet, and Michael, almost distraught, is saying, what are we going to do now?" Quincy felt that there were certain elements that were missing still, and we went back to the drawing board.
He just has a great quality for excellence, for perfection, and anybody who's worked with him notices this. The way he'll make you do a thing until it's perfect.
Over and over again?
Yes.
He's difficult to work with?
No, I like to be grinded a lot. No, he's not difficult at all. He'll say, "It's beautiful, we have a take." Then he'll say, "Well, can you give us one more?"
Jackson and Jones made many different mixes of each song due to their dissatisfaction with every result. After they finished the record, the production team was surprisingly somber. No one was happy with the way the tracks had turned out, so they decided to remix every single song once again, spending an entire week on each track. Quincy Jones saying that they, quote, "did the final mixes up until 9 o'clock in the morning of the deadline. We had 3 studios going at once." After a total of 4 months and coming in on a budget at $750,000, the crew submitted the final record on November 8th, 1982, just 22 days before its release. The team had whittled down a collection of 30 demos to the chosen 9 that made up the final album, with Jackson writing 4 of them himself. But after leaving the studio, were the crew confident they had achieved the goal they initially set their sights on? Quincy Jones stated that there is never any way to predict a hit record. Quote, "You can't explain something like that. You can't aim at it," he said. "It's why I used to keep a sign in the studio saying, 'Always leave space for God to walk into the room.'"
Everybody goes into a studio to make the biggest record in the world. Sure. And everybody's always surprised when it isn't the biggest record in the world. Surprised when it's not.
And everything was just right. Again, if you just get out of your own way and let that force go to work, that's what happened.
Bruce Swedien harbored similar sentiments. Quote, "I think anyone who would have the balls to say that is a liar, because you don't really know until it gets out in the public and they say, wow, this is really good." The only person certain that the record would achieve incredible success was Michael himself. Jerry Hershey from Rolling Stone stating that, quote, "Michael had predicted it all when I first met him. The Media Geek Show, the staggering sales figures, the order of singles, everything in which was to come." In preparation for its release, renowned photographer Dick Zimmerman captured the album cover's final image, which featured Jackson in a slick white suit he plucked off the photographer's shoulders while shooting. The gatefold sleeve reveals a tiger cub at Jackson's leg, which, according to Zimmerman, Jackson kept away from his face, fearing it would scratch him. Album artwork, certainly in the 80s, played a key role in attracting record buyers. A visual representation of the music inside, before the prominence of music videos. For a record that covers such a diverse range of genres, its slick monochromatic styling may have signified a musical reset of sorts. A new era, detached from previous disco glitz, bubblegum, and Motown, ushering in the next chapter of Michael Jackson. The presence of the cub showcasing his playfulness, as well as signifying Michael's attraction to the exotic and his more daring side. Certainly not your typical Jackson's record, the title suggesting something unexpected. All thriller without the filler. The public's first hint of a new era of Michael Jackson came with the release of its lead single, a playful track he wrote and sang with ex-Beatle Paul McCartney, "The Girl Is Mine." The singer's first credited collaboration came about after Jackson and Quincy Jones visited McCartney at his ranch in Tucson, Arizona, spending a couple of days rehearsing and indulging in the musician's shared obsession with cartoons. Quote, "When I approached Paul," Jackson wrote in his 1988 autobiography, Moonwalk, "I wanted to repay the favor he had done me in contributing Girlfriend to Off the Wall." The two soon began collaborating musically, a partnership that continued even when the Jacksons went on tour, with the ex-Beatle tagging along, songwriting with Michael whenever he was not on stage. During this time, the duo recorded Say, Say, Say and The Man for McCartney's upcoming fifth solo album, Pipes of Peace. However, it was now Michael's turn to write a song for them for his next LP. Producer Quincy Jones had initially told Jackson to write a song about two men fighting over a girl. Inspired, Jackson awoke during the night and sang the song into a tape recorder. He later said, quote, "I sang exactly what I heard in my head, starting with the melody and the keyboard and the strings and everything. So I just orally put it all on tape." Jones listened and then asked Jackson to add a rap verse of the two friends talking it out. Quote, "We're fighting over this girl in the song," Jackson said, and it came out beautifully. The Superstar Duet was the first track recorded for Michael's new album at Westlake Studios, Los Angeles, from April 14th to the 16th, 1982. The session became a spectacle in itself, attracting press attention even before a single release date had been announced. Toto guitarist Steve Lukather, who had gotten a call from Jackson himself to play on several songs, vividly recalls, quote, "The McCartney duet was really insane," he said. "You can imagine what kind of a zoo it was, with Michael and Quincy and McCartney and all the people and the staff and the security. We never even got into the control room. Beatles producer George Martin and Beatles engineer Jeff Emmerich were there, Dick Clark. It was so intense." Despite the chaos and the distractions while recording, engineer Bruce Swedien only had fond memories of the session. Quote, "Paul was such a gentleman. He came to the studio prepared. Linda McCartney was with him and we had a fabulous time." Michael Jackson even said that the recording of The Girl Is Mine was one of his most enjoyable moments in the studio. Reminiscing, quote, "Of all of my recordings as a solo artist, my favorite is probably The Girl Is Mine. Because working with Paul McCartney was pretty exciting and we just literally had fun. It was like lots of kibitzing and playing and throwing stuff at each other and making jokes. We actually recorded the instrumental track and the vocals pretty much live at the same time."
And Michael and I were both up for working together, and it was very professionally handled, so that all it really needed was for us to get out there and perform and have a good time. But with Michael, it's not really work. It's just, it's more like play, It's just like when you start up in the business or with a group and so they say, well, we play together. It's the word you use with music, isn't it? He plays. But what does he do for a living? He plays. And in this instance, that's all it was, really. We were just playing around.
After, Michael Jackson was positive they'd recorded a surefire hit, a signature tune for both of them that embodied McCartney's melody and his distinctive groove. Dick Clark commenting, quote, "Even during rehearsals of the tune, you knew it was going to be a hit. I could tell from the level of excitement in the place the creative partnership was bound to be magic. And you know what? That's exactly what Michael Jackson says entertainment is. Magic." McCartney, however, expressed some trepidation about the song's bubblegum feel. He was especially concerned about the cloying use of the word doggone. Quote, "You could say it's shallow," he admitted. "When I checked it out with Michael, he explained that he wasn't going for depth, he was going for rhythm, he was going for feel." Released on October 18, 1982, a month before the album, and while the team was still recording, Bruce Swedien recalls, quote, "Quincy would come in every morning and put on a couple of local radio stations, and they were all playing The Girl Is Mine, so that would make you very serious about your work very quickly." The single's cover photograph was taken by McCartney's wife, Linda, and while the sweet enough middle-of-the-road song was charming, one thing was certain. This wasn't the Don't Stop Till You Get Enough Part 2 many were expecting. But for Michael, the breezy radio-friendly tune was the obvious first single, especially after McCartney achieved a hit duet with Stevie Wonder, Ebony and Ivory, earlier that year. later writing that, quote, "We really didn't have much choice. When you have two strong names like that together on a song, it has to come out first or it gets played to death and overexposed. We had to get it out of the way." However, radio listeners were overall not that impressed by The Girl Is Mine and felt that Jackson and Jones had diluted their talents to accommodate to a white pop audience. Without anything else to go by, many feared Jackson's upcoming LP would also be a disappointment if the singer's overarching ambition was to achieve widespread commerciality. However, Jackson knew from experience with racially segregated radio airplay practices, releasing his McCartney collab first would give his subsequent releases a better chance of crossing over into the mainstream. Song Facts explaining, quote, "It was released first because it was guaranteed airplay thanks to McCartney's contribution. The song was a very safe choice as the first single since it was very conventional and easy to understand. Jackson was afraid that if he released an edgy song first, people wouldn't give the album a chance. Jackson's instincts would ultimately be proven correct, as the mainstream track that essentially chronicles an interracial love triangle would go on to sell 1.3 million copies. The Girl Is Mine kicking off a string of chart success for Jackson, making it to number 2 on Billboard and all the way to number 1 on the R&B singles chart, the first time a Beatle topped the R&B list. Soon after, Michael Jackson's new album Thriller quietly slipped into the charts at number 11 on December 25, 1982. When compared to its lead single, the listeners were stunned by what they were confronted with as the album's opening track, instantly silencing those who believed Jackson may have lost his edge. 3 ricocheting drum beats kick off the frenetic opener, appropriately titled "Wanna Be Startin' Something." Its driving beat and hypnotic bass made it the closest thing on Thriller to Michael's previous output. Which is no surprise because the singer reportedly started working on the track while recording Off the Wall, which may be one reason it was chosen as the album opener. There simply wasn't a genre for a song like this in 1982. It wasn't disco. It wasn't funk. It wasn't R&B. It wasn't new wave. It was something new. A song so wild and energetic, it nearly bursts at the seams. Michael Jackson is in high-energy mode, nimbly and clearly enunciating the onrushing lyrics that varies from astonishment to righteous frustration. Jackson introduces a new tone that would soon become his signature, an edge of fear and paranoia. Unlike previous releases that centered on innocent crushes and dancing all night long, he, for the first time, depicts something darker and more insidious. A world hungry for idle gossip that feasts on rumor and innuendo, while even sparing a verse to square off with teen pregnancy. Jackson's vocals are biting, intense, and even taunting as he teases, "You're a vegetable, they eat off of you." Originally written for his sister LaToya about her troubled relationship with her sisters-in-law, Michael ended up recording the song himself. Bruce Swedien recalling, quote, "That track is about Michael's brother's wives and how they were always creating trouble. That was his inspiration." The song was originally composed in 1978, but was later re-recorded in the fall of 1982, and was one of the 4 tracks that Jackson received writing credits for. "Wanna Be Startin' Something" climaxes in an African-inspired chant, often misidentified as Swahili, but is actually based on Douala, giving the song an international flavor and reassuring listeners that Jackson hadn't lost his funk or forgotten his roots in black music. Journalist Nelson George writing that when the Jackson 5 traveled to Senegal in 1973, the experience had a profound effect on a teenage Michael Jackson. George quotes Jackson as saying, quote, "I don't want the blacks to ever forget that this is where we come from and where our music comes from. I want us to remember." A slight variation on Cameroonian saxophonist Manu Dibango's 1972 proto-disco hit, Soul Makossa. Quote, "Michael heard that, and he liked it," recalled Quincy Jones. "I said, 'Michael, that's Manu Dibango's record,' and he said, 'But I need it.'" This was the sound of a new pop renaissance. It had no borders. It was a sonic carnival, perfectly capturing the diversity, fusion and velocity of a new era.
Well, I know that Michael would have a little, it wasn't a dictaphone, a little cassette. He'd be like, and he would, I think, work out some things with that little move. He was something else. He was able to create what he needed.
When released as a single, reviews for the track were positive. Christopher Connolly, writing for Rolling Stone, describing Wanna Be Startin' Something as being, quote, Thriller's most combative track. Connolly noting that in the hyperactive tune, Jackson's, quote, emotions are so raw that the song nearly goes out of control. Cashbox called the song a smash, specifically praising the, quote, danceable groove, superb arrangement, and strange but ultimately uplifting lyrics. Stephen Thomas Erlewine, a writer for AllMusic, described the song as, quote, the freshest funk on the album. Ultimately, Wanna Be Startin' Something was well received by listeners and charted around the world, receiving an award nomination for Best R&B Song at the 1984 Grammy Awards. Surprisingly, with the lyrics of Wanna Be Startin' Something, Jackson makes a fleeting reference to the album's upcoming second single, quote, Billie Jean is always talkin' when nobody else is talkin', tellin' lies and rubbin' shoulders, so they called her mouth a motor. This next release would redefine Michael Jackson, the artist, and ignite Thriller's seemingly unstoppable ascent into the history books. As soon as listeners heard the crispness of its opening beat and its straight-to-the-point groove, they knew they were in for something not quite like anything else. If ever there was a quintessential Michael Jackson tune, it would have to be the sonic masterpiece that is Billie Jean. Michael Jackson wrote and recorded the demo in his home studio in Encino, Los Angeles. The premise of the track was his desire to compose something that had a lot of bass. Jackson said of the song, quote, a musician knows hit material. It has to feel right. Everything has to feel in place. It fulfills you and it makes you feel good. That's how I felt about Billie Jean. I knew it was going to be big while I was writing it. Michael Jackson would go on to recall that he was so absorbed in the writing of the song, he was riding down the Ventura freeway and didn't realize his car had set ablaze. Quote, we were getting off the freeway when a kid on a motorcycle pulls up to us and says, your car is on fire. Suddenly we noticed the smoke and pulled over, and the whole bottom of the Rolls-Royce was on fire. I was so absorbed by this tune floating in my head that I didn't even focus on the awful possibilities until later. Once at Westlake Studios, Jones had Jackson sing over dubs through a 6-foot cardboard tube and brought in jazz saxophonist Tom Scott to play the Lyricon. When engineer Bruce Swedien was putting together the string section, he was aiming for a classical feel instead of a pop sound. He said, quote, I don't think there are any basses on those strings, but it was violin, viola, and cellos, and it was absolutely classical in the approach. Swedien ended up mixing the song 91 times, which was unusual for him. The mixes grew progressively worse, and Jones asked Swedien to listen again to the second mix, which was much better. Therefore, the second mix became the final version. Quote, there aren't many pieces of music where you can hear the first 3 or 4 notes of the drums and immediately tell what piece of music it is. But I think that is the case with Billie Jean, Swedien reflected. While recording Billie Jean, Michael Jackson and his producer Quincy Jones constantly fought over the track. Some reports stating that Jones felt it was too weak to be included on the album, a claim the music producer has since denied.
We told him what songs he was going to sing. The producer has to do that, you know. You don't ask him what songs we're going to sing. And that this whole fallacy about me not liking Billie Jean is a lie. It is. It's some lie that started somewhere, because anybody could hear that record's a smash. And also, I know where it came from.
However, Jones did dislike the demo, nor did he care for the bass line, wanting to cut its 29-second introduction. But Jackson insisted that it be kept. According to Jones, quote, the intro to Billie Jean was so long you could shave during it. I said we had to get to the melody sooner. But Michael said that was what made him want to dance. And when Michael Jackson says something makes him want to dance, you don't argue. So he won. Quincy Jones also wasn't keen on the track's title, wanting to change it to Not My Lover, as he believed that audiences might mistakenly think the song was referring to tennis star Billie Jean King. However, Jackson refused to change the title and asked Jones to give him co-producing credit for the track, as he felt that the finished product sounded very close to his demo. In addition, the singer requested extra royalties, but Jones granted him neither, and the two fell out over it for several days. According to Jones, Jackson stole Billie Jean's instantly recognizable beat from State of Independence, a track Jones produced for Donna Summer and that Jackson sung backing vocals on. According to songwriter John Anderson, quote, "They took the riff and made it funky for Billie Jean, so that's kind of cool, that cross-pollination in music." However, according to Daryl Hall of Hall & Oates, Jackson told him that the Billie Jean groove was in fact lifted from their 1981 track, "I Can't Go For That, No Can Do." Hall telling the former child star, quote, "Oh, Michael, what do I care? You did it very differently." That being said, both accounts remain unconfirmed. Upon the official release of Billie Jean on January 3, 1983, listeners were surprised by its lyrical content. These were emotions no one had ever heard from the former boy wonder. Quote, "I figured that he was making a conscious effort to change his image," Michael's mother Catherine revealing. "I think he felt that his image had become too safe." For the first time, Jackson lifts the lid on the realities of fame, and that despite the public's preconceptions, it has its darker side. A cautionary tale to, quote, "Be careful of what you do, because the lie becomes the truth." Billie Jean delves into themes of suspicion, rumor, and the perils of stardom. Recounting the story of a woman named Billie Jean who seduces the narrator, then claims that they have fathered her child, and despite his emphatic denials, continues to insist on his responsibility, causing immeasurable turmoil in his life. Michael Jackson stating, quote, "This track was really personal." The singer's inspiration coming from the groupies he and his brothers encountered during their time performing as the Jackson 5. These groupies would linger around backstage doors, forming relationships with any band members that came to town. Encounters that continued, as demonstrated when Michael was at his home in Havenhurst and some girl had snuck over the wall. His producer Quincy Jones said that Jackson found the woman one day lounging by his pool with a bathing suit and sunglasses on. According to Jones, she accused Jackson of being the father of her child, which Jones thought was hilarious. However, the track's true inspiration was really rooted in a far more sinister experience that he didn't feel comfortable revealing to his closest collaborators, not even Quincy Jones. When Jerry Hershey of Rolling Stone noticed a snapshot tucked into a picture frame in Jackson's dining room, he acknowledged the image was of the real Billie Jean. Hershey described her as a, quote, "black teenager of average countenance, posing, most likely, for a high school yearbook." The genesis of Billie Jean had in fact stemmed from letters Jackson received in 1981 from a woman asserting that he was the father of one of her twins. Jackson regularly received such claims, despite never meeting these women, and therefore would usually just ignore them. However, she persisted, professing her love and desire to be with him, and questioning how he could ignore his own flesh and blood. These letters troubled Jackson to the point of causing him continuous nightmares. The situation escalated when Jackson received a parcel containing a photo of the fan, a gun, and a letter instructing him to kill himself at a specific time, with the fan planning to do the same after killing their baby so they could reunite in the next life. Subsequently, Jackson learned that the fan had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital. Quote, "I want to memorize her face," he said, "in case she ever does turn up someplace." In fear of inciting more obsessive fanatics, he never publicly revealed this origin story. Michael later writing, quote, "There never was a real Billie Jean. The girl in the song is a composite of people my brothers have been plagued with over the years. I could never understand how these girls could say they were carrying someone's child when it wasn't true." However, despite Jackson's attempts, the release of Billie Jean would usher in a new wave of psychotic extremists who believed the superstar was in fact singing about them. One even changing their name to Billie Jean Jackson and actioning a $150 million paternity case against the superstar. Thanks to the release of Billie Jean, by January 1983, Michael Jackson's Thriller album had reached #1 on the R&B chart, and a month later, it topped the Billboard 200. The single also topped the music charts on March 5, 1983, before even the release of its accompanying video. Billie Jean was directed by Steve Barron, who was chosen because Jackson and Quincy Jones liked the mystery murder treatment he did for the Human League's video Don't You Want Me, released the previous year. Barron's original idea was more complex and involved a group of dancers. With budget a factor, they simplified the concept and went with the idea of Jackson having a Midas touch, with the squares he stepped on lighting up.
The brief was he really was looking for something magical. And I'd done an idea about a year earlier about the Midas touch and about everything lighting up in real magic. I wrote down a treatment which was about walking down the street and some sort of private detective. And what I'd planned for him in terms of walking along the street and the dances and things was that all the paving stones would be interactive. So he pressure interactive. So he'd step on one and the light would come on. Of course, you know, the budget that the art director couldn't deliver on the day. I had to take Michael through what worked and what didn't. And I said, unfortunately, we've only got 11 of these stones that light up. And I said, this is one, those two, and then you've got to skip that one. And he said, no, let's just do it.
Steve Barron remembers being in awe of the artist. Quote, "We shot that first take, got to the end, and everyone, up in the gantries eating their sandwiches, reading the paper, painters working on another set, just burst into applause. We all just knew we'd seen another era of superstar." To save on set design, they used a technique where painted glass was placed in front of the camera to fill in the wide shots without building actual set pieces. The video also utilized innovative editing techniques, including rapid cuts and transitions, to create a dynamic and engaging visual. Barron and his team worked closely with Jackson to capture his dynamic stage presence and showcase his dance moves in a way that was both captivating and stylish. The video also debuted Michael Jackson's new look for this era. Gone was his signature afro and showbiz glitz, to be replaced by a slick Jerry curl and black leather suit with a playful pink shirt and a red bow tie. A photographer follows Jackson but can never capture him in celluloid, as when photographed, the superstar fails to materialize on the developed picture. Jackson dances as he walks along a sidewalk to Billie Jean's hotel room. Upon arrival at the hotel, he climbs the staircase to Billie Jean's room, lighting up each step and illuminating a burnt-out hotel sign as he passes it. The paparazzo then arrives at the scene and watches as Jackson vanishes under the cover of her bed, before the police arrive and arrest him for spying on Billie Jean. As the paparazzo is led away, he drops a tiger print cloth that Jackson had left behind after polishing his shoe with it earlier in the video. On both occasions, the cloth briefly transforms into a tiger cub, referring to the cover of Michael Jackson's Thriller album. The Billie Jean video is often credited with breaking color barriers on MTV, a channel that debuted on August 1, 1981, and up until that point exclusively pushed white artists with a more rock-oriented output. This didn't go unnoticed, as MTV was accused of racism during this era, most notably by Rick James, whose Super Freak video was rejected by the network.
You know, this isn't the Wizard of Oz. I mean, there are black people here, and we make music, and we spend thousands, $100,000 on videos. And we're not doing this for the sake of because we enjoy doing it. We're doing it because it's part of the art.
Quote, "Maybe MTV gets slagged because of what is construed as its overt racism," journalist Michael Shore wrote in The Village Voice in 1982. Quote, "It goes for the biggest sellers to the biggest audience, which means white youth music as in corporate rock and heavy metal." Many behind the scenes at MTV argued that while viewers in New York or other cosmopolitan centers wouldn't be fazed by seeing black artists as part of their programming, they also needed to accommodate Middle America and less open-minded territories. Even though MTV had a growing viewership, record companies wouldn't budget for videos by their black artists since they didn't think they would play them. So the network could make the argument that they simply didn't have any good videos by black artists. However, as an avid fan of filmmaking, Michael Jackson knew that argument wouldn't fly as soon as he presented them with the Billie Jean video, which was startlingly innovative and took the new art form to greater heights. Despite its production value and Jackson's star quality, MTV initially refused to air Billie Jean, promising to instead broadcast Michael's next video because it was more fitting to their rock format.
We are looking for a certain sound and a certain point of view.
Bob Pittman is the 29-year-old whiz kid who created MTV after a successful career as a radio station program director. He sees little difference between radio and cable.
We are not all things to all people. We are cable television, and what cable television does best is specialize. One thing per channel, so you know exactly what you're getting when you turn on the channel.
Enraged by their refusal, Walter Yetnikoff, the president of Jackson's record company CBS Records, threatened to expose MTV's stance as a racial discrimination. Quote, "I said to MTV, I'm pulling everything we have off the air, all our product. I'm not going to give you any more videos. And I'm going to go public and tell them about the fact you don't want to play music by a black guy." MTV quickly relented and premiered the Billie Jean music video on March 10, 1983. The single was already topping the charts, but in part because of the video's heavy rotation on MTV, Billie Jean soon broke records by remaining #1 for a total of 7 weeks. Although MTV fed the public Michael Jackson's most captivating of visuals, the video didn't contain the superstar's most iconic elements of Billie Jean. For example, his fedora, sequin glove, and the moonwalk. These visual cues would debut on May 16, 1983, when Jackson agreed to perform the track at the Motown 25, Yesterday, Today, Forever television special. Jackson had initially declined to perform, as at the time he wanted to distance himself from Motown and his brothers, focusing his attention on his solo work, but reconsidered after he discussed the offer with Berry Gordy, the founder of Motown, and Michael agreed only if he could perform his new track. Following performances by Marvin Gaye, Smokey Robinson, and Mary Wells, the Jacksons sang a medley of their early Motown hits. After the group performed I'll Be There, his brothers left Michael alone on the stage. Jackson wore black pants, leather penny loafers, a black sequined jacket, sequined socks, and a single white rhinestone glove. He addressed the audience, and then Billie Jean started playing to an erupting applause. During the song's instrumental interlude, he executed a move that many believe sealed his status as a pop icon. Jackson gliding backwards, performing what instantly became his signature, the moonwalk, before spinning on his heels and landing on point. It was the first time Jackson performed the move in public, after practicing it over and over again in his kitchen prior to the show. The special was watched by 50 million people, and Jackson received an Emmy nomination for his performance. Motown 25 is considered a watershed moment in popular culture, solidifying Michael Jackson as a supreme performer of a generation. The day after the show aired, Jackson was called by his childhood idol Fred Astaire, who commended him for his performance. Another childhood idol, Sammy Davis Jr., admired Jackson's black sequin jacket during the show and later received it as a gift. Despite the show's success, Michael was surprisingly dissatisfied with his performance. After getting off stage, he cried due to being unhappy with his spin and toe stand, as he wanted it to last longer. However, the gloved one was comforted by a kid that ran up to him after the show and emphatically praised his moves, taking solace in the belief that children are often your most honest critics. As a result of this performance, Jackson reached a new audience and increased sales of Thriller, soon selling as much as 1 million copies a week, becoming the first artist ever to have an album and single in top position on the Billboard charts at the same time. In 1984, Billie Jean would be awarded honors including 2 Grammy Awards and an American Music Award. Certified Diamond, a Billboard poll named the tune as Black Single of the Decade, with many considering Billie Jean as one of the greatest songs of all time. Despite the unmatched success of Billie Jean, Michael Jackson wasn't going to let his musical masterpiece have its moment before releasing his next smash from Thriller. Beat It was released on February 21st, 1983, as the album's third single. From its opening electro chimes, this sounded unlike anything else you had heard from Jackson or any other black artist, in fact. After finishing the other tracks for the album, Quincy Jones still felt something was missing. Quincy saying that he felt the album needed, quote, a song like My Sharona, a black version of a strong rock and roll thing. With the ongoing backlash against disco making it necessary to make a stark switch from Off the Wall, Jones and Jackson were determined to make a rock song that would appeal to all tastes. Michael Jackson writing that, quote, I had been thinking I wanted to write the type of rock song that I would go out and buy, but also something totally different from the rock music I was hearing on Top 40 radio. The result was harder, grittier, rawer than anything Michael Jackson had embarked on before. Gone was the softness and sweetness that usually characterized his vocals, replaced by a more defiant and challenging delivery that is razor sharp. Jones saying, quote, we were very conscious of wanting a white rock and roll groove, and when Smelly wrote Beat It, we knew he'd come up with the nitroglycerin. Quincy spent weeks looking for a suitable guitarist for the song. Eventually, they found Steve Lukather of Toto to play the rhythm guitar parts. Lukather was working on the track when he heard that an Eddie Van Halen guitar solo was also going to feature. Quote, when they told me Eddie was playing on it, and they were trying to do a crossover record, I whipped out the Marshalls and did a wall of sound, he said. Quincy sent that back and said, quote, the guitars are too heavy. They'll never play this on R&B radio.
He goes, I love it except the guitars are too heavy. I got to get this on R&B radio, pop radio, and rock radio. They wanted me to do this part, and they're standing there, and I did it a couple times, and Quincy's like, it's not really in the pocket, lay in the pocket a little bit more. And Michael gave me a little bit of direction and stuff like that. Let's try it again. And I started doing it. When Michael started dancing around a little bit, I knew I think Quincy's like, that's great. Let's double that part, and blah, blah, blah. And that's the record.
Unfamiliar producing rock artists, when Van Halen came in to record his solo, Jones told him, quote, I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you what to play. The reason you're here is because of what you do play. Of course, Eddie Van Halen nailed it in 3 or 4 takes. Engineer Swedeen remembering, quote, that guitar solo is incredible. But I went in there when he was tuning and warming and I left immediately. It was so loud. I would never subject my hearing to that kind of volume level. Eddie Van Halen reminiscing that he did the solo for free as a favor, even though he technically didn't have permission. Quote, the band's policy was we don't do things outside of the band. And everybody was out of town, so I had no one to ask. I swear to God, I figured who's gonna know if I play on this Black Kids record? Myth and rumor surrounded Eddie Van Halen's contribution, one being that a mystery blaze broke out in the control room as he played. Quote, Eddie was playing and the monitor speakers literally caught on fire, recalled songwriter Rob Temperton. The speaker caught fire and we were all thinking, like, this must be really good, this solo. Also, on the final version right before Van Halen's guitar solo begins, a noise is heard that sounds like somebody knocking at a door. It was reported that the knock was a person walking into Van Halen's recording studio. Another story claimed that the sound was simply the musician knocking on his own guitar. However, Jackson performed the knocking sounds himself by striking a drum case. He is even credited on the album as drum case beater. Packed with killer hooks and a strong musical sensibility, Beat It pulls Michael Jackson into an urban world and relays the pressure of a young man needing to prove himself in a tough street environment. Michael takes total command with an impassioned vocal begging young men everywhere to stop the macho craziness inherent in gang life. Motivated by memories of rumbles between rival gangs from the front window of his childhood home in Gary, Indiana. Even after being lifted out of poverty, arriving in Hollywood to become a star at an early age, Jackson continued to grow up in an environment poisoned by toxic masculinity, the same poisonous substance that infects boys who join gangs. His ex-boxer, steelworker father terrorized and whipped him and his brothers regularly. The palpable sense of urgency in Michael's voice as he sings, quote, "Don't want to see no blood, don't be a macho man," can easily be identified as a plea to temper emotions before it goes too far. As though coming from someone who first-hand experienced the trauma of machismo gone wild. However, music critics interpreted Michael's depiction of gang violence as being more rooted in Hollywood spectacle, rather than his experience on mean streets of Gary. Songfacts asserting, quote, his interpretation of two gangs coming together to rumble was based on the celluloid interpretations that he'd seen, specifically West Side Story, which used gangs as musical art. Unsurprisingly, the 1961 musical adaptation was a huge inspiration for Jackson when composing Beat It. Its title lifted from the movie's opening line.
Beat it.
Its references become even more evident in the track's accompanying music video. News of a fight circulates a diner and pool hall where gang members arrive, and the song begins to play. The camera cuts to Jackson lying on his bed as he contemplates the senseless violence. Jackson then dances his way towards the fight through the same diner and pool hall seen earlier. A knife battle takes place between the two gang leaders in a warehouse until Jackson arrives. He breaks up the fight and launches into a dance routine. Donning a zippered red leather jacket, black pants, white socks, and black loafers, the video ends with Jackson at the center of mass choreography with several synchronized dancers, introducing elements that would soon become his visual trademarks. The second video released for the Thriller album was originally going to be directed by Billie Jean director Steve Barron. But Barron's idea was for Beat It to take place on a ship full of white slaves, with Michael Jackson as the slave master. But even in the early MTV days, that just wasn't going to fly. So the video was written and directed by Bob Giraldi. Jackson asked Giraldi, at the time already an established commercial director, but who had never directed a music video, to come up with a concept for Beat It, because he really liked a commercial Giraldi previously directed. It was about a blind elderly couple who, instead of running from a rundown neighborhood all the other white people had fled from, chose to stay and throw a block party for all the young children in the area. Contrary to popular belief, the concept of the video was not based on the Broadway musical West Side Story, Giraldi instead drawing inspiration from growing up in Paterson, New Jersey. Quote, I listened to the song over and over and realized it was about all the Italian hoodlums I grew up with. Everybody trying to be tougher than they are, but really we're all cowards at heart. The video, which cost Jackson $150,000 to produce after CBS refused to finance it, was filmed on Los Angeles' Skid Row in March 1983. The short film was Jackson's first treatment depicting black youth and the streets, so to add authenticity to the production, Jackson cast members of rival Los Angeles street gangs Crips and Bloods as extras. Giraldi adding that while shooting, things got a little tense, so he had them shoot all scenes with the gang members on the first day.
Let me just throw the music on. Let me try and see if I can just diffuse the situation, and then we'll go home and I won't call the Crips and Bloods back tomorrow. I have enough footage of them anyway. Michael Jackson comes down the boxes and they start dancing. And then all of a sudden, the other dancers start flailing their arms and start dancing. And I'm watching the Crips and the Bloods. They're just lined up, supposedly watching this thing going on. But the looks on their faces are so fascinating. Watching young African-American, probably gay men. They were watching the beautiful grace and symmetry of the dance, of the choreography, that they knew, tough as they were, they could never do that.
In addition to around 80 genuine gang members, the video also featured 18 professional dancers and 4 breakdancers. The video's world premiere took place on MTV on March 31st, 1983, just when Billie Jean was building momentum. An idea of Frank DeLeo, the vice president of Epic Records, who convinced Jackson to release Billie Jean and Beat It in quick succession. With both videos going into hot rotation for much of the summer of 1983, DeLeo correctly predicted that both singles would reach the top 10 at the same time. Billie Jean making it to number 1, before being toppled by Come On Eileen, which stayed at number 1 for a single week, before Jackson reclaimed the top position with Beat It the following week. Billie Jean and Beat It therefore occupied the top 5 at the same time, a feat matched by very few artists.
I had played on Beat It, on Michael Jackson's record, and his album went to number 1, and our album was number 2. Our single was number 1, his single was number 2. Then he did that Pepsi commercial, he burned his hair, and he stayed at number 1. Selfish, man. To this day, the guys in the band still blame me for that album not going to number one.
The single remained at the top of the Hot 100 for a total of 3 weeks. With sales of over 10 million worldwide, Beat It is one of the best-selling songs of all time and received the 1984 Grammy Award for Record of the Year and Best Male Rock Vocal Performance, as well as 2 American Music Awards. However, Beat It's impact extended far beyond just sales figures, as it decimated segregated radio formats and reshaped the future of pop music. Island Def Jam chairman L.A. Reid remembers being blown away. Quote, "Today we do things called mashups," he said. "Take Linkin Park and Jay-Z and put it together, and it's certainly unique, but it's not unusual." But at that time, Eddie Van Halen was at the top of his game and fit right in with Beat It. It didn't feel like a guitar solo over some R&B track. It was very organic. The idea of it was really unusual, but the results weren't strained at all. With Thriller's edgier tracks Wanna Be Startin' Something, Billie Jean, and Beat It flooding radio airwaves and populating music charts around the world, Michael Jackson's music revolution was in full effect. However, the singer wasn't content purely releasing catchy pop hits, but aspired to show range and prove his other talents. As Jones would put it, quote, "To penetrate, you have to go for the throat in 4, 5, 6 different areas." And after a few high-heat songs in a row, it was time to cool things down. Toto keyboardist Steve Porcaro, along with some of his other bandmates, were assisting with the production of Thriller when Quincy asked if he had anything that could be pitched for the album. Running low on cassettes, Porcaro used a tape on which he had already recorded a demo called Human Nature, putting songs intended for Quincy Jones on the reverse side and marking on the label as to the side that should be listened to. Jones's gut instinct was that Porcaro's intended tracks were not quite right for Jackson. However, he didn't stop the tape, and the cassette deck automatically started playing the other side. As Jones described it, quote, "All of a sudden, at the end, there was all this silence. There was why, da-da-da-dum, da-da-da, why. Just a dummy lyric and a very skeletal thing. I get goosebumps talking about it. I said this is where we want to go, because it's got such a wonderful flavor." Lyrically, Steve Porcaro's inspiration for Human Nature came to him after a conversation with his daughter after a boy hit her at school. Porcaro comforting her by saying, quote, "He probably likes you, and it's human nature."
We had one more mix to do, which was the song Africa. And I stopped by to see Heather on my way to the studio, and she'd had a rough day at school. And the title entered into my head, Human Nature, trying to explain why this boy who probably liked her had hit her at school that day. And the guys were in the booth putting up the mix, and I went out into the studio where the piano was. And pretty much the main chord structure of the song kind of all came to me at once.
He later created a demo for the track and presented it to Toto's other bandmates. However, they passed, stating it wasn't rock enough and felt the song would work better for someone else. Jones was excited about its potential, but was dissatisfied with the original lyrics. So he asked John Batiste, who had written hits for the likes of the Carpenters and the Pointer Sisters, to write some new ones. Porcaro, reflecting on Batiste's contribution, quote, "He just nailed it. He turned my record into a song with a beginning, middle, and end." As the song developed, Jackson's breathy, lighter-than-air performance resulted in one of Thriller's most memorable moments, an ethereal, melodic symphony that cushioned Jackson's vocals as they float and swirl before taking flight with those oh-so-perfect, and unscripted, extended exclamations of why. By the late 1970s, Jackson's abilities as a vocalist were well regarded. Rolling Stone critic Stephen Holden writing that, quote, "Jackson's feathery-timbered tenor is extraordinarily beautiful. It slides smoothly into a startling falsetto that's used very daringly. Jackson's vocal delivery keeps the track feeling fresh, and the intoxicating melody feels as though it has been plucked from the future or another world entirely." Even though Jackson didn't write Human Nature, the unencumbered emotion in his voice gives no doubt that Jackson found resonance in its lyrics. An outsider from his window looking onto a thrilling city, the singer fantasizes about stepping out and connecting with the life that surrounds him, yet appears to be out of reach. Michael Jackson attempts to take himself off the pedestal of fame and pursue a woman he is interested in. The yearning for freedom and authentic personal connection being universal. Michael revealing desperate times of unhappiness and isolation in his autobiography. Quote, "I was so lonely. I wanted to meet people who didn't know who I was. I wanted to run into somebody who would be my friend because they liked me and needed a friend too, not because I was who I am."
I get afraid of, well, I don't know people. I get afraid of people sometimes. I don't know. It's a whole nother life that I haven't really experienced that. Like friendship is a thing I'm just beginning to learn about. I was raised on the stage and that's where I'm comfortable. And everything else is like foreign to me. I'm just beginning to know and learn about people, friendship, and things like that.
Human Nature ultimately replacing another track which had already been recorded, titled Carousel. A light, playful number that echoed similar sentiments found in Off the Wall's Girlfriend and Rock With You, as well as the Jackson Brothers' earlier bubblegum hits at Motown. A flirtatious whimsy that fans grew to expect as part of a Michael Jackson record, and that was delivered on Thriller with PYT, Pretty Young Thing. Written by James Ingram and Quincy Jones with a spring in its step, PYT is the album's designated infectious party jam. While not overly complex musically nor vocally challenging, there is a sweetness embedded into the track. A moment of fun dance pop that isn't meant to change the world, but will undoubtedly shuffle your feet as you listen. Quincy Jones came up with the original title after his wife, Peggy Lipton, brought lingerie with the words "Pretty Young Thing" printed on them. From there, Jones asked several songwriters to write a track around the title. Jackson penned a mid-tempo version of PYT with keyboardist Greg Phillinganes. However, Jones wanted an upbeat track, and when James Ingram presented his demo, Jones said, quote, "That's it," and sent Ingram home to finish the lyrics. Jones then suggested they extend the bridge and add a chant section, resulting in Jones receiving his only co-writer credit on the album. Michael Jackson professed his love for the version Ingram and Jones came up with, stating that he liked the code in the lyrics and the fact that the words like tenderoni were fun rock and roll type words that couldn't be found in the dictionary. James Ingram later described working with Jackson and Jones. Quote, "It's almost like I got the chance to go to Oz, and Quincy was the Wizard of Oz, and Michael Jackson was who he was dealing with in his world. Their work ethic is unbelievable." For backing vocals, Swedeen positioned Jackson at different distances from the microphone to record each track, so to get a thicker sound. Two of Jackson's sisters, Janet and LaToya, also provided backing vocals, singing the na 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 part behind their brother towards the end of the song in the guise of being the PYTs. When eventually released on September 19, 1983, PYT had already gained popularity with listeners and was in heavy rotation on black radio. A frizzy funk tune, it was a perfect remedy for Jackson fans on the lookout for a danceable groove in the post-disco era. Michael continued to serve this niche on the Thriller album by incorporating tracks written by Rod Temperton. Having previously written hits Always and Forever and Boogie Nights as a member of the multiracial R&B group Heatwave, Temperton was at this point a trusted Jones collaborator. Having previously contributed to Jackson's Off the Wall album, its title track Burned This Disco Out, and the mega hit Rock With You. Writing the upbeat but ultimately unreleased Got the Hots and Hot Street, Temperton ended up contributing 3 other songs that made it onto Thriller. This included the funk soul groove Baby Be Mine that finds Jackson in a more carefree space vocally than elsewhere on the album. Quincy Jones refers to Baby Be Mine as Coltrane done in a pop song. Quote, "Take a close look at Baby Be Mine," he said, starting to scat. "It goes deedle-dee-doo, dee-dee-dee. That's Coltrane, man. It's got pop lyrics and a beat, but it's Coltrane." It all came from the same place. The frequent chord changes and occasional key shifts reflect bebop values, as do the quick splashes of background vocal fills. The production and specifically Jackson's vocals elevate the song from being purely filler, as one expects it would be on a lesser artist's album. However, Rob Temperton wasn't satisfied just writing the more frivolous pop tracks on the album and was inspired to write something more theatrical to suit Jackson's larger-than-life stage persona. Temperton improvised with bass and drum patterns until he developed the bass line that runs through the track. Then he wrote a chord progression that built to a climax. He recalled, quote, "I wanted it to build and build, a bit like stretching an elastic band throughout the tune to heighten suspense." Temperton's first version was titled Starlight, with the chorus lyric, quote, "Give me some starlight, starlight sun." Quincy felt that the song should be the album's title track, but felt Starlight was not strong enough of a title. Instead, they wanted something much more mysterious to match Jackson's evolving persona. Saying to the songwriter, quote, "You managed to come up with a title for the last album. See what you can do for this one." Temperton revealing, quote, "I went back to the hotel, wrote 200 or 300 titles, and came up with Midnight Man." Jones felt Temperton was going in the right direction, but still wasn't quite there yet. Quote, "The next morning I woke up and I just said this word. Something in my head just said this is the title. You could visualize it at the top of the Billboard charts. You could see the merchandising for this one word, how it jumped off the page as Thriller." With the title decided, Temperton wrote its lyrics within a couple of hours. Somehow the British songwriter picked up on Jackson's love of horror movies and gave the lyrics a more ominous feel. The song found a balance between a Broadway-style narrative and a thumping, irresistible dance floor beat. Temperton envisioned a spoken word sequence for the ending, but did not know what form it should take. It was decided that it had to be performed by a famous voice from the horror genre, with Jones's then-wife suggesting her friend Vincent Price. Temperton composed the words for Price's part in a taxi on the way to the studio on the day of recording. Quote, "Rod wrote this brilliant Edgar Allan Poe spiel," said Jones, "and Vincent really understood it. Vincent did it in 2 takes. Incorporating sound effects such as creaking doors, thunder, footsteps, wind, and howling dogs, or more like Michael giving his best imitations. As soon as you hear the opening of Thriller, it's difficult not to conjure up visuals for its short film. But before its iconic imagery was burned into our collective consciousness, Thriller was just this catchy but kooky track in the middle of an otherwise mature album. For that reason, Thriller was not initially planned as a single, as Epic saw it being more of a novelty song. When asked, Walter Yetnikoff saying, quote, "Who wants a single about monsters?" However, after the album dropped from the top of Billboard 200 in the summer of 1983, having spent months at number 1, the singer urged Yetnikoff to help conceive a plan to return the album to the top of the charts. Obsessive about his sales figures, Jackson's manager Frank DeLeo suggested releasing Thriller as a single, backed by a new music video. Quote, "It's simple. All you've got to do is dance, sing, and make it scary." After seeing the 1981 horror film An American Werewolf in London, Jackson contacted its director John Landis. A bold move, as film directors had not worked on music videos before, but Landis was intrigued.
I thought, I don't want to do a video. They're commercials to sell records. That's not my interest. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. It'd be fun to shoot a musical number correctly. I had hoped that to exploit his celebrity to bring back the theatrical short. And he was very enthusiastic about it. And I went home and I wrote a script that would be a 2-reeler. And I brought it back and he loved it. He said, though, the only difference was he said, "Can the zombies dance?" Sure.
The director suggested they make a theatrical short on 35mm film with the production values of a feature film, rather than a standard music video. With a budget of $500,000, Thriller was going to be a much larger endeavor than any other music video before it. According to the director, when he called Walter Yetnikoff to propose the film, he swore so loudly Landis had to remove the phone from his ear. From the record label's perspective, they had little interest in making another video, believing that the album had already peaked. MTV, who benefited greatly from Jackson's earlier visual output, had a policy of not financing music videos, instead expecting record companies to pay for them in order to promote their artists. With Epic only contributing $100,000, Landis's producer George Folsey Jr. suggested a making of a documentary that, combined with the full-length video, would produce an hour-long film that could be sold to television to help finance its production. When the idea was proposed to networks, Showtime agreed to pay for half its budget, and MTV confirmed they would pay the rest, justifying their expenditure as financing a motion picture and not just a music video. Quote, "I wanted something that would glue you to the set, something you'd want to watch over and over," Michael wrote in his 1988 memoir. "I wanted to be a pioneer in this relatively new medium and make the best short music movies we could make." Thriller was even an event when it was being shot in October 1983. Marlon Brando, Fred Astaire, Rock Hudson, and Jackie Kennedy Onassis all turned up on set, and Eddie Murphy, Prince, and Diana Ross were spotted at its private premiere on the 14th of November. A week later, it was first shown to the public. To be eligible for the Oscars, it needed a week-long theatrical release, so Landis arranged for it to open bizarrely at Disney's Fantasia, at a single cinema in LA, though it was never nominated by the Academy. Then at midnight on 2nd of December, after weeks of trailers and media hype, MTV debuted Thriller to the world. The video opens with a disclaimer stating that Jackson in no way endorses supernatural practices, a decision made to help stem criticism from Michael's Jehovah's Witness faith. In the short film's extended prologue, Michael's moonlit date with his girlfriend, played by model Ola Ray, is cut short when their car breaks down. And while walking to get help, Jackson is transformed into a howling creature and attacks his date. The real Michael and Ola observe the scene in a movie theater and decide to leave after she gets spooked. Michael continues to tease her as they walk through empty streets, and nearby a horde of zombies rise from their graves, threatening the couple. To Ola's horror, Michael transforms into one of them himself and leads the troop of zombies into a choreographed dance routine. Afterwards, Michael and the other zombies corner Ola in an abandoned house, only for her to realize it was all a nightmare. Though Michael offers a last beast-eyed glance at the camera before the credits roll. While the music video has plenty of visual elements that have since become iconic, particularly Jackson's red moto-style jacket and matching pants, the Thriller dance sequence, developed by choreographer Michael Peters, is one of the most distinctive and imitated choreographies of all time. Dancer Vincent Patterson was asked to train Jackson and the other dancers for 4 days before they filmed, as well as appear as a zombie in the video himself. Quote, "I thought Peters hit the target immediately," Patterson recalls. "It was technical to a point. You couldn't be too technical with Michael Jackson. He wasn't an extremely trained dancer, but he could pick up things very, very well." Other iconic scenes in the music video included Michael's various terrifying metamorphoses. Inspired by American Werewolf in London, Jackson initially wanted to be transformed into a 4-legged beast. However, this idea was soon replaced with a 2-legged monster so Michael could still dance. John Landis suggested that Jackson should become a werewolf in a 1950s setting, inspired by the 1957 film I Was a Teenage Werewolf. However, special effects makeup artist Rick Baker decided to instead turn Jackson into a werecat. Quote, "Because I just didn't want to do another werewolf," he said.
And I discovered he really just wanted to turn into a monster. That was his desire. He loved it. And we showed him all these photos of monsters from different movies. Learned he'd never seen any of these movies. I mean, he knew Bride of Frankenstein was like, and King Kong. It was like it. He had never seen anything. But he wanted to turn into the werewolf like David Naughton did. Which David was 4-footed. It turned into a, and I said, "Mike, if you're gonna dance, it'll be hard with 4 feet." I said, "Let's do like I Was a Teenage Werewolf," the Michael Landon, which is why he's wearing a Letterman's jacket. It's a 50s thing. And Rick eventually created that kind of leonine, sort of a cat monster, werecat thing, who's kind of elegant,
Initially envisioning a werecat that would resemble a Black Panther, Rick eventually added a longer mane and larger ears. According to Landis, the production involved the largest makeup team in film history up to that point, with 40 artists making up Jackson, dancers, and other extras into terrifying depictions of the undead. During its development, John Landis insisted that Jackson's transformations couldn't be too unattractive, but Baker was amused at how into the idea of turning into a monster Michael was. Quote, "I thought he's like a rock star. I don't think he's going to want to wear this makeup." But it turned out that's what he wanted to do more than anything, Baker recalled.
But you also did personal makeups for Michael, too, after that.
I didn't.
Never?
No. He wanted me to make pieces for him, disguise pieces and stuff, so he could go out. But he wanted to put them on himself. And I really felt we couldn't do what he really wanted, and he couldn't put it on in a way. I remember there was a picture in the National Enquirer of Michael with an afro wig on and his face painted gray, and it said it was a $10,000 makeup by makeup artist Rick Baker.
Great, nice commercial.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I didn't want to do it.
After the video premiere and the Making Michael Jackson's Thriller documentary was released on VHS, it attracted more than 100,000 advance orders, going on to sell nearly 10 million copies and winning a Grammy for Best Video Album in 1985. The video's success also doubled the already sensational numbers in album sales. Thriller would go on to receive 3 MTV Video Music Awards for Best Overall Performance in a Video, Best Choreography in a Video, and Viewer's Choice, as well as a People's Choice Award for Favorite Video of the Year. The song had been certified diamond, selling over 10 million units, and Thriller continues to chart every Halloween season, reaching number 1 on 3 different Billboard charts the week of November 8, 2023, some 40 years after its initial release. Another Rob Temperton track that made it onto Thriller, one of the only 2 that wasn't released as a single, was The Lady in My Life. Chosen to close the record out, the classic Sinatra-style ballad provides a finale full of grace and dripping with old-school soul. Michael wasn't a stranger to a ballad, but this wasn't some love song about a rat. Quincy Jones wanted to challenge Michael to perform something with much more soul and depth to it. The Lady in My Life isn't recounting an innocent crush or the bubbling excitement of a new romance. It's much more mature and committed with its intention. Quote, "We were used to doing a lot of takes in order to get the vocal as nearly perfect as possible, but Quincy wasn't satisfied with my work on that song," Michael Jackson remembered. "Finally, he took me aside late one session and told me he wanted me to beg. That's what he said. He wanted me to go back to the studio and literally beg for it. Therefore, Michael went into the studio and had them turn off the lights and close the curtains so not to feel self-conscious. Quincy started the tape and Jackson begged profusely, and the result is what you can hear on the record today. Described as the closest Jackson has come to crooning a sexy, soulful ballad after his Motown years, The Lady in My Life is another slice of perfect production. Seductive and smooth, the song slowly builds with Jackson's sublimely pure vocals and enticing melodies. Originally recorded with extra verses, timing constraints on vinyl forced the song to be trimmed back. Sacrificed was more than 2 minutes of Jackson's ad-libs in an extended outro that showcases his brilliance as a natural vocalist. Never to be performed live, nor did it receive a video, the track remains a mysterious glimmer of Jackson's undefinable magic. Through the pulsating beats and electrifying melodies of Thriller, Michael Jackson truly transcended the boundaries of music to create a timeless masterpiece that still resonates with audiences across the globe. Its success gave Jackson an unprecedented level of cultural power never previously achieved by a black artist, leading him to being honored by the president at the White House as the most significant entertainer of a generation. Thriller was the first album to spend 37 non-consecutive weeks at number 1 on the Billboard 200, conquering the Grammys in 1984, winning a record-breaking 8 awards including Album of the Year, a space and time when Jackson's unparalleled talent and creative vision single-handedly ignited a revolution in music, forever altering the landscape of popular culture. Greatness that cannot be replicated ever again in quite the same way, but can still inspire those brave enough to meet the standard Michael Jackson set all those years ago, whether yesterday, today, or forevermore.